He asks that in chapter 317. Nobody answers it for 37 chapters. What happens in between is one of the fights the series is best known for. Almost everything written about it is about the fighting. It ends with him asking the same question a second time. I measured this fight. The music, the editing, the manga pages against the finished frames. Almost all of it pointed back to those two words. 13 parts. This is the first. Ulquiorra Seifer asks whether a heart exists, and whether he would find one by opening a chest or a skull. It sounds like cruelty. It is closer to a method. Every technique he owns is a way of looking at something, and the fight only ends when he is finally shown a thing he can accept as evidence. His detection sense is called pesquisa. The word is Spanish for inquiry. His generated blade is luz de la luna, light of the moon, which is light that has bounced off something else before reaching you. His released form is named for a bat, an animal that sees by sending a signal out and listening for what comes back. None of that is decoration. Kubo gave this character a toolkit made entirely of ways to perceive, and then built his position out of it. He says his eye perceives everything and overlooks nothing, and that he has always fought on the understanding that whatever it cannot see does not exist.
まずい。急ごう。
Resurrección. Segunda etapa.
Read that as a claim about the world, rather than an insult, and the fight changes shape. He is not refusing to believe in the heart because he is cold. He is refusing because he has a standard for what counts as real, and nobody has met it.
別に勝てるつもりで戦ってるわけじゃねえよ。勝たなきゃいけねえから戦ってんだ。
Ichigo never rebuts this. Across the whole fight, he does not once produce a counter-argument, because he does not have one. What he has is a commitment he cannot demonstrate, and has no interest in demonstrating. He keeps standing up, which is the only form of reply available to someone whose position is not evidential. That is why the two of them talk past each other so completely. Ulquiorra wants a thing he can observe. Ichigo is offering a thing that cannot be observed by construction. It is not that one of them is wrong. They disagree about what would even count as being right. I wanted to know whether that reading was mine, or whether other people saw it too. So I pulled the voting data from Personality Database, where the community types fictional characters. 3,200 votes on Ichigo, just under 2,000 on Ulquiorra. Nobody voting on one was necessarily voting on the other, and nobody was coordinating. The result is a clean inversion on every axis I checked. Where Ichigo is read as feeling-led and physical, Ulquiorra is read as thinking-led and abstract. Ichigo is scored at 75% for emotional volatility. Ulquiorra is scored at 0. Both are read as melancholic. They differ entirely in what the melancholy does with itself. Then, I found the number I did not expect. On motivation, the votes for Ulquiorra are almost unanimous. 78% read him the same way. On Ichigo, the same community splits nearly 3-2 between two incompatible readings and has never resolved it. "47% read him as driven by identity, someone who does not know what he is and fights to find out. 32% read him as driven by the wish to be left alone, whose anger stays buried until something he loves is threatened. What is strange is that both readings are on screen in the same episode, minutes apart. The show does not choose either. One more figure, and it is the one nobody mentions. On the moral alignment grid, only 22% of voters place Ulquiorra anywhere on the evil half. 63% call him neutral. He murders the protagonist on camera, in front of the girl he abducted, and the audience declines to call him a villain. That is unusual for a shonen antagonist, and I think it is the fight telling you how to read it. He is not evil. He is empty. Emptiness does not get defeated. It gets answered, or it does not. Which means the ending cannot be a win, and the fight has known that from the beginning. The question that ends this fight is asked 37 chapters before it. Not to Ichigo, and not during a battle. Ulquiorra asks it of Orihime in a cell, while she is his prisoner. He wants to know what a heart is, and where he would have to cut to find one. She is the one who answers him, eventually, and the answer takes until chapter 354 to arrive. That reframes everything the fight is doing. Ichigo is not Ulquiorra's opponent in the argument. He is the experiment. The two people actually having the conversation are the ones who barely exchange a word until the very end, and one of them spends the middle of it lying dead on the floor. The fight is usually described as a handful of chapters at the end. It is longer than that. The duel runs from 341 to 354. and the first encounter that sets it up is back in the 315s. 14 chapters of running battle, which is a substantial share of an arc that people mostly remember as one image of a man with a hole in his chest. Length matters here because of what Kubo does with it. He is not filling 14 chapters with exchanges. He is running 3 motifs the whole way and letting them accumulate. By the end, each one has been stated 3 or 4 times in slightly different conditions, so that the final instance lands as a conclusion rather than an image. I want to take those 3 in turn, because I think they are the actual architecture. Not the power levels, not the transformations. A whole, a word about winning, and a word about protecting. Each one enters early, gets damaged in the middle, and resolves on the page where the fight turns. Before any of that, though, there is a line in 341 that I think is the most underrated moment in the fight. The 2 of them are still just dueling with swords. Ichigo finds he can read Ulquiorra's movements, which he could not do before, and he says out loud that this could mean one of 2 things. Either he has become more like a hollow, or Ulquiorra has become more like a human. That is the thesis of the entire fight, spoken by the protagonist in chapter 341, as a passing observation. Nobody follows it up. The fight then spends 13 chapters demonstrating that the first option was correct, and the demonstration is so thorough that Ichigo stops being able to speak. He does it again a few chapters later. Ulquiorra points out that the Getsuga Tensho resembles a Sero, and Ichigo insists flatly that they are nothing alike. Twice now he has been shown the resemblance, and twice he has pushed it away, once by naming it himself and not pursuing it, once by denying it outright. The story is going to make him wear it. The first motif is the simplest thing in the fight, and I think the best built. It is a hole. Ulquiorra has one, because every hollow does. It sits clean through his chest, and in the spread where he arrives in his second release, Kubo puts it dead center of the composition, where you cannot avoid it. A few pages later, he fires a Sero through Ichigo. The wound it leaves is not a burn, and it is not a gash. It is a circular void punched clean through the chest, drawn in the same weight and the same place as the one Ulquiorra is carrying. The kill makes Ichigo, for a moment, exactly the same shape as the thing that killed him. Then Ichigo gets up, and what stands up is not Ichigo. It is a hollow with a mask and horns, and it has that hole permanently. 3 chapters, 1 shape, 3 states. The enemy's mark, then an injury, then an identity. The wound has stopped being something done to him and become something he is. And the payoff is a single panel. When Ichigo comes back to himself, Ishida looks at his chest and notices the hole has closed. Kubo puts the closing of the hole on the same page as the return of the person. He stops being the same shape as his enemy at the exact moment he stops being the monster. 4 chapters of visual argument, resolved without anybody explaining it. The second motif is a word, and it is set up as a contradiction that turns out not to be one. Partway through the fight, Kubo gives Ichigo a wide panel, face-filling it, and a line about fighting because he has to win. Not because he thinks he can, because he has to. Look at what he is wearing while he says it. The mask is on. 5 chapters later, after the transformation, after the Hollow has beaten Ulquiorra half to death and turned on his own friends, Ichigo gets the shot again. Same framing, same shout, same mouth open, and the mask is gone. The line this time is that he does not want to win like this. Put those two panels next to each other, and it looks like a character contradicting himself. I do not think it is. He is masked for the first, and barefaced for the second, and that is the whole argument sitting in the artwork. He was never obliged to the outcome. He was obliged to winning as himself. The moment the win requires the mask, the obligation stops pointing at victory and starts pointing away from it. That is a hard idea to state in dialogue without it sounding like a speech. Kubo does not state it. He draws the same shot twice, 5 chapters apart, and lets the second one land against the memory of the first. The argument happens between the 2 pages rather than on either of them. The third motif is the one I find hardest to watch. Just before the transformation, lying with a hole in his chest, Ichigo has one last coherent thought, and it is that he will protect her. That is the final input. Not winning, not revenge, not Ulquiorra. And the output is a thing that cannot speak at all. The Hollow does not say a word for an entire chapter. The last human intention was to protect somebody, and what that intention produced is something structurally incapable of saying so. If I had to compress the whole doubling argument into one observation, it would be that one. Then it comes back. 2 chapters on, the Hollow is standing over Ishida, having just run him through, and the same words surface in broken pieces. Half a word, then the rest of it, delivered over the body of the person who came to help. Identical words, and the meaning has been turned completely inside out. The sentence survives the transformation. What it means does not. And then Ichigo comes back, and the first thing out of his mouth is the same word again, this time as a question. He asks Orihime if she is all right. Whole, then in pieces, then as a question. Kubo runs one word through 3 states and uses it to measure how far the character traveled and how much of him came home. There is a habit in these chapters worth naming. At the points of heaviest assertion, Kubo takes the drawing away. The panel about true despair is pure black. The dismissal of everything Ichigo stands for is one word on a black field. When Orihime is at her most helpless, asking what she is supposed to do, the image is gone again. This is a comic, so black is not an absence of information. It is a choice that costs the same as any other panel. He is not saving effort. He is removing the thing you came for at the moment you most want it, and making you sit with the lettering alone. It is the page equivalent of cutting the score. Which brings me to the chapter I think the fight is actually built around, and it is not one of the famous ones. 349. Ichigo is dead on the ground for the entire chapter. He does not move, he does not speak, he is not the point of view. Ishida tries to intervene and fails. The whole thing is staged through Orihime. That is the midpoint of a shonen fight, and the protagonist is a body in it. Everything is filtered through a character who cannot fight, watching someone she came to help lie dead in front of her. The chapter ends on her asking for help and getting a heartbeat in reply. I want to be careful about how much weight that carries, so here is the plain version. The ending of this fight is not delivered by Ichigo. It is delivered by Orihime, and by a hand that reaches out. Chapter 349 is that structure arriving 5 chapters early, at the exact center, and nobody talks about it. So that is the shape of it on the page. An argument with a beating attached, 3 motifs entering early, getting broken in the middle, and resolving inside a few pages of each other near the end. None of it announced, and most of it carried by drawing rather than dialogue. Which raises the question the next few parts are about. All of that is built for a page you control, where a reader can look at 2 panels at once, where black costs nothing, where a shape can sit in the corner of 4 chapters. Almost none of those advantages survive being turned into 22 minutes of television. 3 different productions tried. One had a weekly deadline, one had a film budget, and one had 14 years of hindsight and 90 seconds. They made different choices, and the differences are measurable. That is where this goes next. Bleach ran for 366 episodes across 7.5 years. Most of them are not very good, and everybody involved knew that at the time. What is interesting is not that one episode in that run is extraordinary. It is that the extraordinary ones arrive on a schedule, and the schedule is a budget decision you can see in the finished frames. This part is about why episode 271 looks the way it does. Not what it means, what it cost, and what had to be given up elsewhere to pay for it. Studio Pierrot has been adapting long-running manga since the late 70s. That is the whole business model. You take a weekly serial that is still being written, you turn it into a weekly broadcast, and you do it forever. Naruto, Bleach, Yu Yu Hakusho. The studio is very good at a specific and slightly thankless job. The job has a structural problem built into it. The manga is being written at the same time as the anime is being made, so the anime keeps catching up. When it catches up, it has to slow down, and slowing down means filler. Bleach has a great deal of filler, and the fight this series is about arrives at the far end of a long stretch of it. Here is the thing that gets described wrongly. People say the good episodes had a bigger budget, as though someone found extra money that week. That is not how a weekly show works. The annual budget is fixed before the season starts. What varies is where it is concentrated. So filler is not just a stalling device. It is a savings mechanism. Outsource it. Animate it cheaply. Give it to whoever is available, and you free the studio's best people and the longest schedules for the episodes that will be remembered. The bad episodes are paying for the good ones, deliberately. That reframes a complaint the fandom has been making for 15 years. The inconsistency is not a failure of quality control. It is the shape of the only strategy available to a weekly production that wants to be exceptional occasionally, rather than adequate constantly. I want to introduce a measurement here that the next 2 parts are going to lean on, because it is the clearest evidence I have that any of this is real rather than received wisdom. I tried to put a number on that. I took 84 seconds of the fight and measured how long each shot stays on screen. The software told me the median shot was about 15/100ths of a second, which would mean a blizzard of cuts. Then I checked it by hand, and it was wrong. Almost every cut it found was a lighting effect inside a shot that never cut at all. Counted by eye, those 84 seconds hold 19 shots, and the middle one lasts about 4.5 seconds. That is still an economy. A held layout with the movement painted into the effects rather than into the characters is far cheaper than animating bodies through the same span. It is just not the economy I thought I had measured. Hold on to that shape. In Part 5, I'm going to put it next to the same fight animated with a film budget. And the difference is not the one people assume. The other half of concentration is staffing, and the credit list for this episode is unusual, before you know anything about the people on it. Episode 271 was storyboarded and directed by Yuzuru Tachikawa. One person holding both of those roles on a climax episode is a decision. It means a single sensibility is choosing what the shots are, and also how they get executed, which is not how a routine weekly episode is made. Tachikawa was not well known at the time. He went on to direct Death Parade, and then Mob Psycho 100, which are two of the more visually distinctive things in modern television animation. This episode is where that sensibility shows up early, before anyone was watching for it. The cuts this episode is actually remembered for, the hollow ones, are credited to Yoshimichi Kameda. Kameda is known for pushing drawings well off model in the direction of raw force. And working against him, two chief animation directors, Hiroki Takagi and Kiyoshi Komatsubara, whose job was to pull those drawings back toward the character design. That tension is the episode's look. One animator distorting a character almost past recognition, and two people correcting him just enough that it still reads as Ichigo. Neither instinct on its own would have produced this. It only works because both were in the room. Around them, the people who were there for the whole run. Masashi Kudo on character design, Shiro Sagisu on the score, Noriyuki Abe directing the series, and behind all of it, Studio Pierrot, founded in 1979 by Yuji Nunokawa, still in Mitaka, still doing the same job it has done for 45 years. None of this makes the episode good. Plenty of well-resourced animation is dull. But it does explain why the good thing could exist at all inside a production that was, most weeks, not trying to make anything like it. Next, what the broadcast actually does with that concentration, and the two completely different ways it animates its two characters. The fight runs across 6 episodes, 267 to 272. I have 4 of them. Everything measured in this part comes from those 4, and where I am relying on the other 2, I will say so. The thing I want to start with is something I did not notice for a long time, and once I noticed it, I could not stop seeing it. The 2 characters in this fight are not animated the same way. They are not animated according to the same rules at all. Ulquiorra is animated as a body in space. He holds poses. He has weight. When he moves from one place to another, you can generally see him do it, and when he arrives, he settles. The camera is often below him, looking up, and he stays in frame long enough for that framing to register as a statement about who is in control. That is expensive animation. Not spectacular. There is nothing flashy about a man standing still. But a held figure has to be drawn correctly from a consistent angle, and a traversal has to be drawn all the way through, or it reads as a mistake. The hollow is animated as something else entirely. It is rarely shown moving. It is shown being somewhere, and then there is an impact, and then there is debris, and then it is somewhere else. The connective motion between those states is mostly absent. Watch for it, and the pattern is remarkably consistent. Position, effect, aftermath. The thing itself is often not on screen at the moment it does anything. What you see is the consequence. And it works. It reads as speed beyond the ability of the camera to follow, which is exactly the impression the scene wants. The audience fills in a movement that was never drawn. Here is why I think this is a budget consequence rather than a purely artistic choice. Drawing a fast, legible traversal is one of the most expensive things in hand-drawn animation. Drawing an impact and some rubble is not. The hollow's entire visual grammar is built out of the cheap operations. That is not a criticism. It is very good work under a constraint, and the constraint produced something better than an unconstrained version might have. A fully animated hollow would be legible, and legible is the opposite of what this character is supposed to feel like. But it does mean the two grammars are not a symbolic decision about humanity and monstrosity that happens to be affordable. They are an affordable decision that turned out to be readable as one. Those are different things, and I think the difference matters. The palette is doing bookkeeping as well. Ulquiorra's power renders green, consistently, across the release and the serro and the lance. The hollows is red, neutral ground, the dome, the sand, the sky between exchanges, is washed almost to gray. So the frame tells you who is winning without anyone saying anything. When green fills the screen, the fight belongs to him. When it goes red, it does not. And when the color drains out entirely, nobody is in control, and something is about to change. There is one camera decision I want to isolate, because I think it is the smartest thing in the broadcast. At the point where the fight stops being a contest and becomes a beating, the camera goes overhead. A duel is shot from the side. Two figures, a shared horizon opposed. Shot from above, a fight stops being a duel and becomes weather happening to somebody. One figure is a shape on the ground. The staging converts a fight into an event at exactly the moment the fight has stopped being one. The broadcast had to soften some of what the manga did, and the way it did that is more interesting than the usual account of it. The claim that circulates is that the framing was tightened, that the anime pulled in to crop the injury out. I checked that against the panel, and it is not what happened. The composition is reproduced almost exactly. Same angle, same diagonal of the blade, same relationship between the bodies. What changes is rendering. The frame floods red, the sword flattens to a silhouette, and the white uniform blows out until the wound disappears into the brightness. The shot is kept. The injury is abstracted out of it. I think that is a better solution than a crop, and I also think it is worth naming precisely because a video essay repeating that it was reframed is repeating something that is checkable and wrong. The adaptation is not only subtraction. The broadcast has exchanges that are not in the manga at all. Extended passages of fighting that exist because 22 minutes of television needs a different rhythm than 20 pages of comic. That is the honest summary of this adaptation. It cannot hold two panels in your eye at once, so it uses color and camera height to carry what the page carried by layout. It cannot afford to animate everything, so it animates one character properly and implies the other. Both of those are losses. Both of them produce something the page could not do. In December 2010, 7 months after the broadcast, the same studio animated this fight again for a film. Not adapted from it, re-choreographed from scratch, as the opening of a movie about something else entirely. It is about 84 seconds long. It is the single most useful thing available for understanding what the television version was working around, because it is the same people, the same material, and a different amount of money. The usual description is that the film version is more balanced, better staged, that you can actually follow it. I think that is true. I also think the explanation people give for it is wrong. The explanation is usually that the film has more time to breathe, or cuts less, or is simply less frantic. So I measured both, 84 seconds of each. The first answer I got was that the film cuts more often, 36 times a minute against 34. That was surprising enough to be interesting, and I very nearly built this whole part on it. Then I checked it by hand, not the summary figures. Every single cut the software found, 6 frames either side, one at a time. Most of them were not cuts. Here is what it was doing. Ulquiorra swings a glowing lance across a held frame. The brightness of the picture changes enormously between one frame and the next, so the detector calls it an edit. It is not an edit. It is one shot with a light moving through it. In one stretch, a single 4-second shot was counted as 11. Counted by eye, those 84 seconds of the broadcast contain 19 shots. The median is about 4.5 seconds. Nothing in them is shorter than half a second. The blizzard of microcuts I had measured does not exist. And the film, across its 84 seconds, cuts several times more often than that, which is the opposite of what I had written down. Whatever the difference between these two versions is, I had it backwards. There is a second problem underneath the first, and it is the more useful one. The 84 seconds I took from the broadcast is a charge and fire sequence built on held images with effects animation inside them. The 84 seconds from the film is a fast montage. Those are not the same kind of passage. Comparing them tells you which two excerpts I happen to pick, not how television and film budgets differ. So the claim comes out. The argument that money shapes cutting rhythm is a good argument, and I still think it is true. This measurement does not support it, and a measurement that agrees with you is the one you should check hardest. I am going to let a shot from the film run now, uncut, for about as long as it actually lasts. Notice that nothing is being hidden. Both of them are visible, the movement is continuous, and you are never being asked to infer what happened. That is what an extra budget buys, not spectacle, legibility. If you want to do this properly, the method matters more than the tooling. Brightness-based shot detection cannot tell an edit from a flash, and this fight is mostly flashes. Every candidate has to be looked at. 84 seconds took an afternoon. Kubo has said this version is the one he prefers. Watching them side by side, I understand the preference, and I do not entirely share it. The film is better made. The broadcast is stranger, and the strangeness is doing something the competence does not. For the 20th anniversary, a trailer restaged a moment from this fight. It lasts 1.5 seconds. I want to spend a few minutes on it, because a 1.5 seconds of deliberate reanimation tells you what the people making it thought the original was. There are 39 frames. The first 23 are wide. Ichigo crossing the frame and striking. Ulquiorra small against the green crescent, debris on the impact. Then 2 frames that are not a picture of anything. Then a close 2-shot in saturated red, and a final run in gold. The 2 frames in the middle are the reason this part exists. Frame 24 is red on black. Frame 25 is nearly white. The average brightness of the image swings by 160 values in a single frame, and then the picture returns. That is the impact frame technique. A single frame high contrast inversion, used as punctuation on a hit. It is the trick the 2010 episode is remembered for, and here it is reproduced inside a modern promo in the modern house style. Nobody watching at speed sees those frames as images. You see a flash, but somebody chose to put them there, which means somebody looked at the original closely enough to identify what made it feel the way it feels, and then did that specific thing on purpose. I am going to hold each of those 2 frames for a full second now, which is about 25 times longer than either of them exists in the trailer. One more measurement, because it corrects an assumption people make about Mu animation. Across the opening shot, the change between one frame and the next alternates. A large change, then a small one, then large, then small. That pattern means a new drawing lands on every second frame, and the small intermediate changes are the camera continuing to move across a drawing that is being held. That is animating on twos. It is the standard economy of the medium, and it is being used here in a promotional piece, with no weekly deadline and no episode to fill. The new version is not more fully animated than the old one. It is animated the same way, better. There is one thing in these 39 frames I have not resolved, and I would rather flag it than quietly assume. From about frame 29, the figure gripping the dark lance appears to have orange hair and a human face. In the original, that catch belongs to the hollow, white, horned, no face to speak of. If the anniversary version has handed the decisive physical moment of the fight back to human Ichigo, that is a significant reinterpretation, and it would be the fourth independent place where the show has something to say about which of these two is which. I have not confirmed it against the original shot closely enough to state it, so I am not going to state it. If it holds, it belongs in the part about the doubling, and it would be the strongest thing in it. Something I did not expect when I started counting. In the stretch of this fight that people remember as its most violent, there are about 5 clearly readable moments of physical contact. 5 in nearly 3 minutes. Everything else is positioning, aftermath, and looking. The fight is remembered as relentless, and what it mostly consists of is 2 people occupying space relative to each other. The staging runs almost entirely on vertical position. Ulquiorra is above, and the camera looks up at him. When that reverses, the reversal is the event. There is no dialogue required to tell you the situation has changed, because the frame has already said it. And when the fight becomes one-sided, the camera leaves the horizontal entirely and goes overhead. I mentioned this in the part about the broadcast. It belongs here too, because it is the clearest example of the principle. This fight does its arguing with camera height and almost nothing else. The other recurring device is eyes, and they are distributed unevenly. Cutaways to an eye punctuate the fight repeatedly, and most of them are his, which is coherent with everything Part 1 was about. His detection sense is called inquiry. His blade is named for reflected light. His position is that what cannot be seen does not exist. A fight staged around a character whose entire identity is perception is going to keep cutting to the organ of perception, and it does. The payoff is that the last thing this fight resolves on is also an act of seeing. 2 words, and one of them is, I see. There is one sustained piece of staging in the whole sequence, and it is the lance. Everything else is a position followed by a consequence. This one has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and both figures are legible for most of it. That is where the animation budget went. When a production concentrates its resources, it does not spread them evenly across the climax. It picks one sequence to be the sequence, and this is that sequence. Knowing that, you can more or less locate the money by looking for the only exchange you can actually follow. Now that all 3 animated versions have been looked at, the comparison is worth making directly, because they stage the same material with 3 different amounts of resource. The broadcast implies motion and lets color and camera height carry the meaning. The film animates the motion and lets the staging carry it. The anniversary version has 90 seconds of screen time and spends part of it reproducing a 2-frame effect from the original, which tells you what that team thought the essential thing was. None of those is the correct approach. They are 3 answers to different questions about money and time. What is striking is that the cheapest of the 3 is the one people remember. I think the reason is that the broadcast's constraints forced it into a strategy that happens to suit its subject. A fight about whether the unobservable is real, animated by a production that could not afford to show you most of what happens, and therefore had to make you infer it. That is a coincidence. It is also the most interesting thing about how this fight looks. Part 2 mentioned this in passing, and I want to come back to it properly, because it is the whole of this part in one line. Early in the fight, before anything has transformed, Ichigo notices he can suddenly read his opponent's movements, and says it might mean one of 2 things. Either he has become more like a hollow, or Ulquiorra has become more like a human. He says it, nobody follows it up, and the story then spends 13 chapters proving the first one. What I want to show you is that the show says the same thing in 3 other places, in 3 completely different registers, and 2 of them are measurable. The opening sequence contains a shot lasting about 2 seconds, a face split down the middle, Ulquiorra's half against Ichigo's half. The halves cross and dissolve through each other, and what resolves out of them is a single face, a white hollow mask, with black tear tracks running down from the eyes. The tear tracks are Ulquiorra's marking. What the opening titles show you, in the middle of the credits, is Ichigo's hollow wearing Ulquiorra's face. Here is the part that changes what it means. That is not this episode's opening. It is the sequence used for 26 consecutive episodes, from 266 through 291. The show ran that image weekly for half a year. It is not a flourish attached to the climax. It is a standing claim that the climax then pays off. The second register is the music, and this one I measured rather than noticed. There is a cue called Clavar la Espada. It is track 4 of the 3rd Bleach soundtrack, the Arrancar album, the record where the composer answers the manga's Spanish naming with flamenco. It is the Espada's musical nationality. Ulquiorra's own released form is named in Spanish for a bat. That cue enters at 1352 in episode 271 over Orihime's plea across Ichigo's body, and it carries through the transformation. So the moment the hero becomes the monster is not scored as a heroic power-up, it is scored with the enemy's theme. Whatever Ichigo is turning into, the music files it under their category, not his. And the comparison makes it sharper. Another cue lands exactly on Ulquiorra's released form being revealed. The Espada gets the battle music. Ichigo gets the Espada's music. The 3rd register is the one Part 2 took apart in detail, so I will be brief. A hole through the chest. Ulquiorra has one because every hollow does. Ichigo is given one by a Cero, drawn at the same weight in the same place. What stands up afterwards has it permanently, and it closes on the page where he comes back. 4 chapters, 1 shape. It is the same argument the titles are making, drawn instead of animated. The 4th register is the least subtle. In a single chapter, 3 separate characters look at the thing that used to be Ichigo and describe it in the enemy's vocabulary. Its movement is named as the Arrancar technique rather than the Soul Reaper one. It is called a human-turned-hollow. It is described as very hollow-like. When a story says something 4 different ways across 4 different craft departments, it is not subtext. It is the text, delivered by everyone except the narrator. Here is why all of that is load-bearing rather than decorative. If Ichigo was simply the opposite of Ulquiorra, then beating him would be a victory, and the story could end there. Because he can only beat him by becoming him, the victory is disqualifying. That is why he refuses it, and because he refuses it, the fight cannot be resolved by the fight. Something else has to close it, which is what the next 2 parts are about. If you have encountered this fight through the internet rather than through the show, there is a good chance you have heard it scored with a piece of choral music called Invasion. It is on every compilation. It is what the fight sounds like in the collective memory. It is not in the fight. I want to spend this part on how I know that, and on why the mistake is more interesting than the fact. Start with something odder. The 2 pieces of music most associated with this battle, Invasion and the cue that plays over Ulquiorra's released form, are both from the soundtrack to a film released in December 2007. That film is a Hitsugaya story. There are no espada in it. It came out 3 years before this fight was animated. Which means nobody scored this battle. Its music was assembled from a library of existing cues, one of them written for a completely different story about completely different people. That is entirely normal practice for weekly television, and it is worth sitting with anyway, given how much of this fight's emotional reputation rests on its sound. To check whether Invasion is in the episodes at all, I use the same class of technique a phone uses to identify a song playing in a room. Take the recording, find the strongest peaks in its spectrum, hash pairs of them into fingerprints, and look for a consistent time offset where a lot of those fingerprints line up inside the target audio. It is designed for exactly this problem, finding a known recording inside a noisy mixture, which is what film score under dialogue and sound effects is. A null result from a method you have not validated is worth nothing, so I ran controls. 2 cues I expected to find, and one I knew could not possibly be there. A metal cover recorded in 2023, 13 years after the broadcast. The Impossible track scored between 12 and 15 across all 4 episodes. That is the noise floor. The 2 cues that should be there scored 893 and 1503. Invasion's best score across all 4 episodes was 38, barely above a recording that cannot be there, and more than 20 times below the weakest genuine detection. Both positive controls fired, which means the method works, which means the null result is evidence rather than a failure to look properly. Invasion does not play in these episodes. What is actually there is two cues, and both are placed with more care than the library assembly story suggests. The first lands on the reveal of Ulquiorra's released form, not on the fighting, on the unveiling. Somebody chose to put the music on the costume rather than the violence. The second is the one Part 8 was about, the Espada's own flamenco theme, entering over Orihime's plea and carrying through Ichigo's transformation. The hero becomes the monster, and the music files him with the monsters. Back to the song that is not there, because the reason the fandom attached it to this fight is more interesting than the era. Its choral text is a single short verse repeated. No names, no places, nothing that ties it to any particular story. And what it describes is a defender, someone holding ground, resisting an incursion, protecting a place he belongs to. Which does not fit Ichigo. He is the invader here. He crossed into their world. Las Noches is Ulquiorra's home and Ulquiorra's post. Read literally, the words fit the Espada better than they fit the hero. For a while, I thought that was an irony nobody had noticed. I have changed my mind. If the show has spent 26 weeks running a title sequence that dissolves these two into one face, then a lyric that cannot decide which of them it is describing is not ambiguous by accident. The ambiguity is the correct reading. The song fits both because the show has been arguing they are both. The fandom found the right words for this scene, in a film about somebody else. There is a further turn. The version of Invasion that circulates with this fight is frequently not the original at all, but a metal cover recorded in 2023. The best-known fan edit of this fight uses that cover rather than the original recording. I checked rather than assumed. The spectral profile matches the cover within 1% across 5 of 6 frequency bands, and the track is recut to fit the edit, not simply laid underneath it. So the chain is a cue written for a different film, adopted by fans for this one, re-recorded by a third party in a different genre, and then re-edited to fit a fan's cut. 4 steps away from anything the production did, and it is what a large number of people now hear in their heads when they think of this fight. I do not think that is a failure of the audience. I think it is a reasonable response to a scene that was scored out of a library and deserved better. The fandom heard a gap and filled it, and what it chose fits the material's central idea more precisely than the official cue does. The music this fight is remembered for is a piece of folk adaptation. That is worth taking as seriously as anything the studio did. Something worth counting before anything else. Across the 6 chapters of this climax, Ichigo is dead, unconscious, or not himself for roughly half of them. Orihime is present and conscious for all of them. The fight is remembered as his. Structurally, A great deal of it is hers, and I do not think that is an accident of pacing. I think the story is built that way, and it is the least discussed thing about it. Start where the question starts. Ulquiorra asks what a heart is, and where he would have to cut to find one. He does not ask Ichigo. He asks her, in a cell, while she is his prisoner, 37 chapters before the fight ends. That is the framing the whole series has been building on, and it puts her in a specific position. She is not the reward for winning the fight. She is the other party in the argument the fight is a demonstration of. The middle chapter of the climax is the one people skip, and it is the one I would point at if I had to defend this reading with a single piece of evidence. Ichigo is dead on the ground for its entire length. He does not move. He does not speak. He is not the point of view. Ishida tries to intervene and fails. Everything is staged through her. That is the midpoint of a fight in a magazine aimed at teenage boys, and its protagonist is a body lying in the sand, while a girl who cannot fight looks at him. Whatever else that is, it is not the default shape. Across those pages, she says a version of the same thing 4 times, and it moves in one direction each time. It begins as a question about what she is supposed to do. It becomes a request for help, and it ends as a request for help directed at a specific person, by name, who is at that moment a corpse. The chapter ends on that, and the reply she gets is not a word, it is a heartbeat. I want to be careful about that beat, because it is easy to read as a moment of triumph, and I do not think it is one. What answers her is not Ichigo. It is the thing that stands up instead of him. There is a line I keep returning to, and it is the reason I think this character is written with more precision than she is usually credited with. She describes her own belief in him, the thing the story has spent hundreds of chapters treating as her defining virtue, as a kind of blindness, not as devotion, as a failure to see clearly. That is a startling thing for a story to let a character say about herself, particularly this character. It is also, in the context of a fight about what counts as evidence, exactly the right vocabulary. Ulquiorra will not believe what he cannot observe. She believes something she admits she cannot see. They are the two positions in the argument, and she is the one who states hers most honestly. And then there is the part that I think the fandom softens, because it is uncomfortable. She blames herself for what Ichigo becomes. And she is not wrong. She called out for him, and the thing that answered was not him. Her stated reason for coming to that world in the first place was to protect him, which is the same sentence he thinks to himself immediately before he stops being able to think. Kubo gives them both the same motive, and then has it ruin both of them. Her cry produces the monster. His intention to protect produces something that cannot speak, and the first thing it does with its freedom is cut down a friend. Her arc through these chapters is not grief, it is culpability. That is a much harder thing to write and a much harder thing to read. Which brings us to why she has to be the one who finishes it. Ichigo cannot end this argument. He has no counter-evidence, and he never produces any, and when he finally wins, he wins by becoming the other thing, which disqualifies the win. The fight cannot resolve itself. It resolves because the person who was asked the question in the first place is still standing there, and finally answers it in a form that meets the standard she was asked to meet. That is next. The last movement of this fight begins with the antagonist rearming his opponent. Ulquiorra returns the sword and proposes they finish it. That is not mercy, and it is not arrogance. It is a man who wants the result to mean something, insisting on the conditions under which it would. What Ichigo does next is stranger, and I think it is the best written thing in the fight. He demands to be maimed. He wants an equivalent injury inflicted on himself so that the outcome will be fair. He does this before he knows he has won. He is disowning the victory while it is still hypothetical, which tells you the objection is not to the result. It is to the terms. Ulquiorra asks to be killed. Ichigo refuses, and then he says the line the whole of Part 2 was built around, that he does not want to win like this. 5 chapters earlier, the same character, in the same framing, said he was fighting because he had to win. Both are true. The obligation was never to the outcome. And Ulquiorra's response to the refusal is not anger. It is something closer to recognition. He observes that Ichigo never does what he is supposed to do, right to the end. Then the fight ends, and it does not end, because anyone wins. He is dissolving. He asks her whether she is afraid of him. She says she is not. He says, "I see." That is the resolution. 2 words from her, and 2 from him. And it works on his terms, which is the only reason it works at all. He spent the entire fight insisting that he would believe what he could observe. He is not argued out of that position. Nobody converts him. He is shown a piece of evidence that meets the standard he set, a person who is not afraid of him, and he can see that she is not, and he accepts it, because accepting observable evidence is what he said he would do. The nihilist is not defeated. He is satisfied. He reaches out. She reaches back, and the page ends 1 frame before they touch. I have looked at that panel a lot. I do not think the withholding is cruelty, and I do not think it is ambiguity for its own sake. The whole fight has been about whether something you cannot demonstrate is real. Ending on contact would have demonstrated it. Ending 1 frame short leaves it exactly where the argument left it, and asks you to decide. He says, before he goes, that he had only just started to find these people interesting. Then there is nothing left of him. This fight was broadcast in May 2010. 15 years later, it is still being clipped, recut, rescored, argued about, and reanimated by the people who made it. I want to finish by treating that persistence as evidence, rather than as trivia. There is a community that catalogs animation at the level of individual cuts and individual animators, and this episode sits in its canon alongside a small number of other episodes from the same show. That is a fairly specific kind of recognition. It is not about the story, it is about the drawings. Which matters for the argument this series has been making, because it means the thing being remembered is at least partly the thing Part 3 was about. A production choosing where to concentrate, and the concentration being visible enough that specialists noticed. The strongest single piece of evidence is that the rights holder chose this fight, out of 366 episodes and several films, to restage for an anniversary. And when they restaged it, they reproduced a 2-frame effect from the original. That is an institution agreeing with the fandom about which 90 seconds of a 15-year run were the ones that mattered. Then there is the reception data, which I find more interesting than it has any right to be. There are public databases where large numbers of people vote on how they read fictional characters. Personality frameworks, alignment, motivation. Thousands of votes on each of these two, cast independently, with no coordination. And the result is a clean inversion. On every axis available, they come out as opposites, not merely different, mirrored, systematically, by a crowd that was not asked to compare them. Two details in that data are worth pulling out. Only about a fifth of voters place Ulquiorra on the evil half of the alignment grid, which is a remarkable reading of a character who spends the story as the antagonist. And the crowd cannot agree on what drives Ichigo. The two leading readings split roughly 47 to 32, which is not confusion, because both readings are visible on screen in the same episode. That is what Part 8 was arguing, arrived at independently by people who were not making an argument at all. And then the music. The fight was scored out of a library, with a cue written for a different film about different people. The fandom replaced it with a piece from the same album that was never in the episodes at all, then replaced that with a metal cover, then recut the cover to fit an edit. The result is that a large number of people now hear, in their memory of this fight, a piece of music that was assembled 4 steps away from anything the production did. And it fits. That is folk adaptation, operating on a corporate product, and it produced something more precise than the original. I have been broadly admiring across this series, so let me be fair about the objections, which are real. Orihime's cries are repetitive, and in the broadcast the repetition is more exposed than it is on the page, because a comic can put 4 escalating lines on one spread, and television has to play them one after another in real time. What reads as escalation in print can read as a loop on screen. Character models drift in the secondary scenes. That is the direct cost of the concentration strategy. The money went to the fight, and you can see where it did not go. And the ending is abrupt in a way that is at least partly a serialization artifact rather than a choice. I think it lands anyway. I also think somebody who finds it rushed is describing something that is genuinely there. Here is the thing I keep coming back to, and it is the only summary I want to offer. A character spent his existence insisting that what cannot be observed does not exist. He asked, more than once, to be shown a heart. Nobody ever argued him out of the position, and nobody needed to. At the end, someone stood in front of him and was not afraid, and he could see that she was not afraid, and that was sufficient. He got exactly what he asked for, on exactly the terms he set, and it turned out to be enough. That is why it stayed.